I'm thrilled to welcome Becka Alper here as part of our conference this morning. Alper is a research associate at Pew Research Center. And for those of us who work in the field of American religion and many other fields, we are constantly we owe a debt of gratitude to Pew for the tremendous work that they do in terms of their research, their analysis, the data that they put out there that's available to so many of us that we use in our teaching, in our research, in our publications. And so it's great to have somebody from Pew here. We're grateful to have Becka here. So Alper contributes to the center's domestic religion polls. And before that, she was a postdoctoral research associate working on the Youth Activism Project at the University of Arizona. She received her doctorate degree in sociology from Purdue University. I was noticing this was not intentional, but there's like a sizable number of people on the program today who have some connection to the state of Indiana. So there's something in the water there, which is good as a product of Notre Dame myself. So she's contributed to or written a number of terrific reports, such as America's Changing Religious Landscape, U.S. Catholics Open to Non-Traditional Families, The Religious Typology, A New Way to Categorize Americans by Religion, and others. So very grateful to have Dr. Alper with us today, so please join me in welcoming her.
I'm happy to be here to provide a little bit of information about millennials and how they're contributing to America's changing religious landscape. I'll begin by talking about religion in America generally, and then I'll hone in on how millennials fit into this broader religious landscape. Now, I'm happy to hear so many of you know about us and use our data. We're very grateful to hear when people do that. For those who don't know who we are, I'll give you a little bit of background information. We're a nonpartisan, non-advocacy, non-profit research organization. We don't take positions on any policy, political, social, or religious issues. We also don't do any commercial or market research. We don't have clients. Our mission is to provide good, solid, up-to-date, objective information that policymakers, journalists, academics, anyone who's interested can use to help understand important things going on both in the US and all around the world. We're a fairly large organization. We do research on a lot of different topics, from political polling, we do demographic research, we study social trends, we study all kinds of things. I focus on public opinion related to religion in the US. To help explain some of the changes currently underway in the US, I'll draw from our religious landscape study, which Janet already referenced a little bit. The centerpiece of this study is a large-scale, nationally representative survey of US adults that we conducted on the telephone. We first did this in 2007. We contacted over 35,000 US adults and repeated much of the survey again in 2014, again contacting another 35,000 plus US adults. This gives us the ability to really understand and take a detailed look at things going on in religion in the US, being able to look at large groups and smaller groups. We ask questions about beliefs and practices, religious affiliation, and since we conducted a lot of the same questions both in 2007 and in 2014, we're able to see how some things have changed or stayed the same in that time span. So first, it's important to understand the religious landscape of the US and how it's been changing. When we conducted the study first in 2007, we saw that 26% of US adults identified as evangelical Protestant. It's the largest share of any single religious tradition when you look at Protestant groups separately. In 2014, we saw that evangelicals still make up a quarter of the adult population. It's still the largest, but the next largest group was now religiously unaffiliated adults. These are people who tell us that they are atheists, agnostic, or nothing in particular. They grew by nearly 7 percentage points in that 7-year time span. Some other groups shrank in size somewhat. You saw Catholics decline as the share of the US adult population, as did mainline Protestants. So there's change going on, and I think we already knew that a little bit, but this really shows that. Generally speaking, the change in the American religious landscape is very broad-based. We see a growing share of the nuns across most major demographic groups. Both men and women have become less religiously affiliated in recent years. College graduates, those who attend less or with less education, across racial and ethnic groups, and in all regions of the country. So there's not one single group we can point to and say this is where the change is occurring. Rather, it's a very, very broad-based trend. So what then is behind the trend, and what can we point to help us understand what's going on? There's a lot to consider here, but there are a couple things we can point to in our data to help explain this change. One major factor is generational replacement. As older generations pass on, they are being replaced by a new generation of people who tend to be less likely to affiliate with a religion than their older counterparts. You can see that this is looking at the share of people who say they identify as Christian or unaffiliated based on generations. In the silent generation, 85% said in 2014 that they are Christian. You can see that millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996, 56% identify as Christian. Instead, 35% say that they are unaffiliated. We also see that the share of the public who identify as unaffiliated has grown within generations, and especially among older millennials. In 2007, 1/4 of older millennials were unaffiliated, and this rose to 34% in our 2014 study. You can also see that there are gaps, so they're smaller, among Gen Xers, baby boomers, and members of the silent generation. These are all significant differences. So it's millennials are changing, but also within generational change, more people more are saying that they are religious nuns. Another important factor to examine when we're trying to understand what's driving religious change is religious switching. Religious switching is very common in the US. Fully 1/3 of adults tell us they currently identify with a religion different than the faith they were raised in, meaning they've changed their religious identity at least once in their lives. And if we include switching within Protestantism, that is a change from, say, an evangelical faith to a mainline tradition, for example, the number is upwards of 4 in 10. This chart you're looking at really zooms in on the ratios of leaving to joining and really illustrates this point. There are about 4 people who become unaffiliated for every one who leaves the nuns. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are about 6 people who leave Catholicism for every one who joins. The mainline Protestant and historically Black Protestant traditions also lose more than they gain, but the ratio is closer to 2 to 1. And evangelicals actually gain a bit more than they lose, so the ratio is closer to 1 to 1. So much of the growth of the unaffiliated can be explained by Americans leaving behind the faith they were raised in, as well as a growing younger generation that is less affiliated to begin with. This begs the question, is the US becoming less religious? In other words, is religion on the decline, or are we just talking about change in the way people identify themselves when it comes to formal affiliation? You can see here that there's evidence that some of the decline in religion in the U.S., evidence of some decline in religion in the U.S. more broadly, beyond just changing affiliation and including declines in certain beliefs and practices. There have been modest declines in belief in God, though still a vast majority of Americans say they believe in God. It's slightly smaller majority than in 2007. You can see there's slight decline in the share of Americans who say they pray every day, who say religion is very important in their lives, or who say they attend worship services with regularity. But even as we're seeing some overall declines, there's a story of stability behind these numbers. If we look just at those Americans who are affiliated with a religion, 3/4 or so of Americans say they are Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Mormon, Buddhist, Hindu, etc. Basically anyone who's not a nun. There's been little to no change on these traditional measures of religiosity. Fully 97% of religiously affiliated adults say they believe in God or a universal spirit, the same share that said it in 2007. 2/3 pray daily and say religion is important in their lives, similar to 2007. And just over 6 in 10 report attending worship services at least monthly, little change from the first religious landscape study. The unaffiliated, on the other hand, are far less religious by these measures and are becoming even less so. The share of nuns who say they are not to or not at all religious increased by 8 percentage points. That's that first column on the left, from 57% in 2007 to 65% in 2014. You can see that there's a growing share of nuns who say they seldom or never pray, from 56% in 2007 to 62% in 2014. Even more nuns say they attend religious services a few times a year or less in 2014 than they did in 2007. And you see that far fewer, there's a 9 percentage point drop in the share of nuns who say they believe in God or a universal spirit, from 70% in 2007 to 61% in 2014. Like we saw before with affiliation, some of this change is in religious observance overall is due to generational differences. For example, 41% of millennials say religion is very important in their lives, compared with 53% of Gen Xers and 59% of baby boomers, and 67% of members of the silent generation. There's a similar pattern when we look at daily prayer or religious service attendance, with millennials being less likely than older generations to say they do either of these. Millennials are also far less likely than members of older generations to say they believe in God with absolute certainty. But we see the smallest gap between millennials and older generations on belief in heaven and hell. 2/3 of millennials say they believe in heaven, compared with 72% of Gen Xers, and 3/4 of baby boomers, or those in the silent generation. Similarly, there's only a 4 percentage point gap or range in between generations in regards to belief in hell. But while millennials, did I go too far? Do you already see this slide? I haven't talked about this slide. Okay, sorry. But while millennials are not as religious as older Americans by some measures of religious observance, they are as likely to engage in many spiritual practices. For instance, like older Americans, more than 4 in 10 of these younger adults say they feel a deep sense of wonder about the universe at least once a week. Likewise, most also say that they think about the meaning and purpose of life on a weekly basis, again, similar to older generations. And roughly 3/4 of millennials feel a strong sense of gratitude or thankfulness at least weekly. By comparison, older Americans are only slightly more likely than millennials to say they feel a strong sense of gratitude. Only when it comes to feeling spiritual peace and well-being are members of the older generation more likely than millennials to answer in the affirmative. To pivot a little bit, we also asked a series of statements about churches and other religious organizations and whether respondents agreed with each. The first 3 here are positive statements, and we see that millennials are similar to other generations in the positive views of religious organizations. Most say that religious organizations protect and strengthen morality, strengthen community bonds, and help the poor and the needy. But millennials are more inclined to have negative views of religious organizations. For example, 6 in 10 millennials say religious organizations focus too much on rules, while half or fewer older generations say this. And upwards of half of millennials say that religious organizations are too involved with politics, while fewer older cohorts share this view. But there's not a large gap between generations when it comes to their views of religious organizations concerned for money and power. Now, we also know that not all millennials are the same. I'll demonstrate this point, this is the last point I'll be making, by focusing on some traditional beliefs and practices within religious groups. So this is just looking at religious service attendance. And you can see that millennials who identify with some religious traditions, such as evangelical Protestantism, Mormonism, millennials within those groups are as likely as their older counterparts to say they attend religious services weekly. You can see that some other millennials within other traditions are less likely to say this. There's a gap between Catholic millennials saying they attend Mass regularly compared to older Catholics. And there's also a gap among mainline Protestants. Looking at generational differences in importance of religion within religious traditions, we see that again, there's not a huge difference between Mormons, younger Mormons and older Mormons, but again, there's this gap amongst Catholics, mainline Protestants in saying religion is very important to them. Looking at those who say they believe in God with absolute certainty, again, similar pattern, more, with not a real gap there between Mormon millennials and older Mormons, or between actually that gap of evangelical Protestants is significant. But they're not all the same, and they're different in degree. Some gaps are far larger than others. We also see that frequency of prayer is fairly similar amongst Mormons, but less so when we're looking at millennials and older generations and who are Catholic or mainline Protestant, or even in the historically Black Protestant tradition or evangelical Protestants. But we see something really interesting when we look at heaven and hell. This is one place where millennials are very similar to their older counterparts, or sometimes more likely to say they believe in heaven or hell than older counterparts. We see this looking at mainline Protestants, amongst Jews for belief in heaven. The other differences are they're not really there, but younger millennial mainline Protestants and Jews are more likely to say they believe in heaven. And you also see a similar pattern with belief in hell, with millennials and many different religious traditions saying they believe in hell as compared to their older counterparts within their religious tradition. So I know I just gave you a lot of information on a day where you're going to get a lot of information. So I'll leave it there, and just to briefly recap, we know that the American religious landscape is changing. We know that the share of nuns are growing. We know that part of that growth is because they're being replaced, as older generations pass on, they're being replaced by a younger generation of people who are less likely to affiliate. And we know that a lot of that decline in belief, various religious beliefs and practices that we see are because nuns are less religious than those who are affiliated. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure what's next. Sure.
Are you going to do the survey again in 2021?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, we don't really announce what we do ahead of time. It's also because, we have different research agendas, and we know definitely what we'll be doing next year, but we don't necessarily know what we'll be able to do in the coming years. So maybe. So the way the religious landscape study works in some of our other research projects, there's two ways to kind of create the Protestant grouping overall. And the way we do this is by asking people, what is your religious affiliation or religious identity, if any? And then we say, are you Protestant, Catholic, Mormon, down the line. They tell us that they're Protestant. We then ask them what kind of Protestant they are. They could say Baptist, Methodist, on down the line. And from there, we ask them their denomination. And so we can figure out exactly what denomination they fall into, and then we kind of aggregate it up to those broad religious traditions. And we classify, we know that some of these groups are changing, and so based on how they view themselves at the time of the study is how we will sort them. So any schism or change that occurred since 2014 wouldn't be captured in here. But as new groups emerge, we sort them and kind of make them fit in the right spot.
So do they tell you we're Presbyterians and you leave it at that, or are they East USA?
Yeah, we can go to that level of detail. It really depends on what they tell us. Sometimes they'll just say, I'm Presbyterian and leave it at that. Sometimes they'll go into the specific denomination. The more information they give us, the more specifically we can put them in the right category. But it depends on what they give us. So, yeah. There's a, yes.
I found this slide interesting about spiritual
I mean, I can't. Right, we don't know. These are. I think we would all like to be able to tell the future, and try and glean what we can from what we see now and how that may translate. We don't know.
Thanks, Dr. Alper. I'm a huge fan. I'm a Conrad fan. I love all your reports. But I would like to piggyback. Actually, it's a nice segue to that question. So this is going to be really nitpicky, so forgive me. You have a slide that is labeled spiritual practices, and it had three indicators: wonder,
Mhm.
thinking about the meaning of life, and a sense of gratitude. Can you explain why that's labeled spiritual? I don't see anything spiritual about any of those things. I mean, we certainly are abundant in secular culture. So what makes
Sure.
a sense of wonder, feeling of gratitude, or thinking about the meaning of life? Why is that spiritual?
Sure. So asking questions about spirituality is difficult because it means a lot of different things to different people, and so we wanted to come up with some questions that were broad in scope that people could maybe identify as spiritual and see themselves in participating or practicing some of these. And so it's something that it's definitely, we think about quite often how to get at something that means so many different things to different people. It's not like you attend religious services. Everyone kind of knows what that means. But it's something that we continue to try and understand and pursue. We have different ways of capturing it. We also sometimes ask, to what extent do you consider yourself spiritual, which is more straightforward. But that's more of how you think of yourself versus things you might do in some way. But that's how we did this. It was just trying to come up with a set of questions that may capture some dimensions to a broad range of people and that they may identify as such. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. So for that question, it's just based on their answer to their religious identity. So anyone who identifies as Christian, if they're Protestant, they're Catholic, they're Mormon, they're all forms of Christian identity, as compared to those who say that they are atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. They did not tell us that. No, they selected into, they chose a box that said I'm nothing in particular instead of another religious identity. Yeah. Sure. Let's go to some of the, generally speaking, Mormons in our religious landscape study are among the most religious across various dimensions. So like this one. So from 2007 to 2014, the size of, or the share of U.S. adults who identified as Mormon didn't really change much. It has hovered about 2%. Generally speaking, so part of the reason why I didn't necessarily include them is because there's no change, and it's not where a lot of the key movement is going on in the U.S. So that's really the main reason why. You're not in this, yeah. But you would be 2%, about 2%, no real change in that 7-year span. Sure. Sure. So one of the things we do, this is a massive study. To survey 35,000 US adults, most people don't do that, especially when it comes to religion. A standard survey may be 1 to 2,000 people. So by making it quite so large, we have the ability to capture a wide range of people. We also made sure it was nationally representative. We made sure to talk to at least 300 people in every state in the District of Columbia. We also employ a practice called weighting, which Jana briefly mentioned. We make sure that the profile of our respondents match the census closest in time to the study. So that was the 2012 census, I believe we weighted to. And so we can be reasonably confident that what we see is pretty good. It also tracks well with other studies that look at religion. The share of nuns in our survey at 2014 was 23%. It's so at the back of, we released 2 very large reports on this, and the back of one of them is an appendix. It's Appendix C if you want to know. And it compares religious groups to other surveys that do religion, and they look alike. We're tracking the same patterns, and so that also gives us some confidence in what we're finding as well.